Historical background of the executive branch. Kentucky's fourth and current constitution, that of 1891, is a typical late 19th century charter. Unlike more recent documents of other states, it is quite lengthy, with approximately 30 sections relating to the executive branch. The governor. Section 69 of the Constitution provides that, the supreme executive power of the Commonwealth shall be vested in a chief magistrate, who shall be styled the Governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Under a 1992 amendment, the governor and lieutenant governor are elected jointly by popular vote of the people for a term of 4 years. Both are eligible to serve a second consecutive term, from Sections 70, 71, and 82. Contested elections for the office of governor are resolved by the General Assembly, Section 90. The qualifications of the office are enumerated in Section 72. The governor must be at least 30 years of age and a citizen and resident of Kentucky for the 6 years immediately preceding the election. Under Section 74, the compensation of the governor is to be set by the General Assembly. The governor possesses a number of specifically enumerated constitutional powers. The governor is the commander-in-chief of the Army, Navy, and Militia of the Commonwealth. Section 75, may fill vacancies in public offices not otherwise provided for under the Constitution. Section 76, may remit fines and forfeitures imposed in judicial proceedings, commute sentences, and grant reprieves and pardons. Section 77. The governor may require information from executive officers, except in cases of impeachment, Section 78, and must inform the General Assembly as to the state of the Commonwealth, recommending such measures as he may deem expedient, Section 79. The governor also has the power to call extraordinary or special sessions of the General Assembly that otherwise meets in regular session every year, Section 80. The governor must state the subjects to be considered in extraordinary session and no others may be considered. Most importantly, the governor has the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Section 81. Another gubernatorial power enumerated in the Constitution is the veto power of Section 88. The governor is given 10 days to veto or sign any bill that has passed both chambers of the General Assembly. If a bill is vetoed, it is returned to the General Assembly with written objections contained in a veto message. If it passes a second time, with a majority of the members elected to each house voting in favor of it, the bill becomes law without the signature of the governor. If the governor neither signs nor vetoes a bill within 10 days, it becomes law 90 days after final adjournment of the General Assembly, unless a special effective date is included in the bill. Section 88. In the case of appropriations bills, those that spend state funds, the governor has the power of the line item veto, that is the power to veto specific lines and items rather than the bill in its entirety. Section 88. Only a vote to adjourn the General Assembly, a state constitutional amendment, approval of a proposed United States constitutional amendment, and a tax referendum under Section 171 are immune from the gubernatorial veto, from Sections 89, 256, and 171. The votes of at least 2/5 of the members elected to each chamber and a majority of the members voting are required for passage of most bills.
Lieutenant Governor. The Constitution also establishes the office of Lieutenant Governor. Under a 1992 constitutional amendment, the Lieutenant Governor is elected jointly with the Governor to a term of 4 years and is eligible to serve a second consecutive term from Section 70 and 82. The Lieutenant Governor performs the duties prescribed by law, and those assigned by the Governor, Section 72. The Lieutenant Governor exercises the power of the Governor when the Governor is removed from office, dies, resigns, or is unable to discharge the duties of the office, Section 84. If the office of Governor is vacant and the Lieutenant Governor is removed from office, dies, or resigns, the President of the Senate administers the government. Section 85. If the offices of Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and President of the Senate are all vacant, the Attorney General convenes the Senate to choose a President, who then administers the government. If there is no Attorney General, the Senate is convened by the Auditor of Public Accounts, Section 87. Other constitutional officers. In addition to the Governor and Lieutenant Governor, Section 91 of the Constitution provides for a number of other officers to be elected on a statewide basis: Treasurer, Auditor of Public Accounts, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Commissioner of Agriculture, Labor and Statistics. This officer is usually referred to as the Commissioner of Agriculture. The Commissioner of Labor is a statutory office. These officers are elected at the same time as the governor and lieutenant governor, and all serve 4-year terms. Like the governor and lieutenant governor, they are eligible to serve a second consecutive term, beginning with the officers elected in 1995, from Section 93. The duties of each office are prescribed by the General Assembly. Additionally, the 1891 Constitution provided for the election of a Register of the Land Office. However, pursuant to Section 94 of the Constitution, this office was abolished by the General Assembly in 1898, and its duties were assigned to the Auditor of Public Accounts. In 1934, these duties were transferred to the Office of the Secretary of State. A 1992 amendment abolished the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and removed references to the Register of the Land Office from the Constitution. Another statewide officer, the Adjutant General, is in direct command of the state's armed forces, subject to the governor's powers as Commander-in-Chief. The Adjutant General is appointed directly by the governor. The 1891 Constitution also required the election from special districts of a 3-member railroad commission, whose duties were established statutorily. Like other elected state officers, members of this commission served for 4 years and were elected at the same time as the governor. However, a 2000 amendment approved by the voters abolished the Railroad Commission and eliminated the elected offices of its commissioners.
Constitutional evolution of the executive branch. Changes in the executive branch through the 4 constitutions of 1792, 1799, 1850, and 1891 generally parallel state constitutional developments in the rest of the nation. Gubernatorial provisions. Under the first constitution, the governor was elected for a 4-year term by the electors of the Senate, who were elected by the people. The subsequent constitutions have provided for popular election of the chief executive, retaining the 4-year term. While the Constitution of 1792 placed no limitation on the number of terms a governor could serve, every constitution since 1799 has prohibited a governor from succeeding himself or herself. However, in 1992, voters ratified a constitutional amendment to permit the governor to serve 2 consecutive terms, beginning with the governor elected in 1995. Minimum age requirements for the governor have changed from age 30 in 1792 to age 35 in 1799 and 1850, and back to age 30 in 1891. The framers of the 4th Constitution cited, in lowering the limit, such notable Kentuckians as Henry Clay and John C. Breckinridge, who had achieved greatness by age 30. While the Constitution of 1792 required the governor to have resided in Kentucky for only 2 years prior to election, a logically low requirement in a pioneer state, each subsequent constitution has placed the minimum at 6 years. Gubernatorial succession has varied. The first constitution, which did not provide for a lieutenant governor, specified only that the Speaker of the Senate, as the presiding officer of that body was then called, would succeed to the governorship upon a vacancy in that office. The Constitution of 1799 provided for a lieutenant governor to be first in the line of succession, followed by the Speaker of the Senate. This pattern was repeated in 1850. The order of succession in the 1891 Constitution was apparently dictated by consideration of economy. The office of President pro tempore was created to avoid the expense of convening the Senate to elect a presiding officer in the event of a vacancy in the office of lieutenant governor who was the Senate president. A 1992 amendment removed the lieutenant governor as president of the Senate, allowing the Senate to elect its own president. The Constitution of 1891 removed a somewhat unusual prohibition of the constitutions of 1799 and 1850, whereby clergy could not be elected governor or serve in the General Assembly. The proponents of the removal of this prohibition argued successfully that the section was discriminatory and deprived the Commonwealth of the services of a particularly gifted segment of society. The opponents maintained that ministers occupied a position so superior to any public office that to become governor would be a step down. They were also horrified by the prospect of clergy engaging in the rough and tumble life of late 19th century Kentucky politics. The formal, constitutionally enumerated powers of the governor have remained largely unchanged throughout the 4 constitutions. The governor has always constituted the supreme executive power, has always been commander-in-chief of the military forces of the Commonwealth, and has always possessed pardoning power, although Section 77 of the Constitution of 1891 added the refinement of requiring that a public statement of reasons for granting pardons be filed. Similarly, the governor has always had the authority to obtain information on matters of state from the executive officers. The power of the governor to call the General Assembly into extraordinary, or special, session is likewise included in each of Kentucky's constitutions. The governor's hand in this regard was strengthened by the current constitution, which permits limiting the agenda of special sessions, to prevent the General Assembly from becoming bogged down in extraneous matters. Each constitution has accorded broad appointive powers to the governor, although the current document limits this authority by requiring the election of a number of other state officers. The gubernatorial veto has also been an ongoing constitutional feature in this state, although the majority needed to override a veto has shifted from 2/3 in 1792 to a simple majority of the members elected in the subsequent charters. In addition, the 1891 Constitution gives the governor a line-item veto on appropriations bills. The chief executive has always had the duty to report on the state of the Commonwealth to the General Assembly and to recommend legislation, and, of course, to faithfully execute the laws. The governor's salary has always been fixed by law.
Provisions concerning the lieutenant governor and other elected, executive, and constitutional officers. The second, third, and current Kentucky constitutions provided for a lieutenant governor. Until 1992, the constitutional duties of the office remained the same: to serve as president of the Senate and to act as governor when the governor is absent from the state, resigns, dies in office, is impeached, or for any other reason is unable to discharge the duties of the office of governor. In 1992, an amendment removed the lieutenant governor as president of the Senate and allowed the governor to retain the powers of the office when absent from the state. The same amendment required the lieutenant governor's duties to consist of those prescribed by law and those delegated by the governor. The number of elected, constitutional, executive officers has increased with each succeeding constitution. Under the 1792 Charter, provision was made for the election of a governor by the electors of the Senate. 2 other officers, a Secretary of State and an Attorney General, were to be appointed by the governor. In addition, a treasurer was to be appointed by the General Assembly. The 1799 Constitution provided for the popular election of a governor and lieutenant governor. An Attorney General and Secretary of State were appointed by the governor, with the advice and consent of the Senate. The 1850 Constitution provided for the election of 6 executive state officers: the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, auditor, and register of the land office were elected for 4-year terms. A treasurer was elected for a 2-year term. Under the current Constitution, as amended in 2000, 7 state executive officers are elected by popular vote: the governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, auditor of public accounts, attorney general, secretary of state, and commissioner of agriculture, labor and statistics. The adjutant general is appointed by the governor. The rather large number of elective, executive state offices called for in the Constitution of 1891 reflects a basic philosophical premise of the convention delegates who drafted it: the people are fully competent to choose their own officials and should be given every opportunity to do so. Prior to the Constitution of 1891, only the governor was prohibited from serving successive terms in office. However, the 1891 Constitution extended this prohibition to all constitutional state officers who were elected statewide. This change was a response to the career of James W. Honest Dick Tate. Lionized in the 1885 history of Kentucky as a genial gentleman, of varied information, and of fine business capacity and integrity. Tate had served 9 terms as state treasurer when, in 1888, he absconded, making off for parts unknown. Gone with him was $247,028.50 and, for some time, the credit of the Commonwealth. Honest Dick Tate was very much in the minds of the drafters of the 1891 Constitution when they decided to forbid successive terms. The arguments of Delegate Thomas W. Hanks of Anderson County in speaking of a 1-term limitation for the treasurer are typical.
I have no doubt that our present governor has selected an efficient man for treasurer, to replace Tate. I have no doubt the people can and will elect such a one. If we had an appointive system, I am not certain, if the governor had had the appointive power, he would not have selected that very man, I mean James W. Tate. By his record, he was at one time a very capable officer, but the trouble was, that Tate was elected too much. He was elected too often, and we propose now not to elect the same man treasurer quite so often or keep him in quite so long. They cannot learn the tricks so well in a short time.
In 1992, voters ratified an amendment that allows statewide elected constitutional officers to serve 2 consecutive terms. Another significant change made in the executive branch by the Constitution of 1891 was a limitation on salaries paid to state officers. Motivated as they were throughout by considerations of expense, the framers specified in Section 246 of the Constitution that no public officer, except the governor, shall receive more than $5,000 per annum as compensation for official services. A 1949 amendment raised this ceiling to $12,000 annually for statewide officers and lesser amounts for others. Delegate W. M. Beckner of Clark County expressed the philosophy behind the salary limitation as follows.
We have regulated office holding and its compensation, until those who seek high places will be animated hereafter by a laudable ambition to worthily wear their honors, rather than by a mean, sordid desire merely to receive the fees or salary of their positions, and will, at the same time, know that they are servants of the sovereign people, and not members of an aristocratic class whose term of service may, by the tricks and wiles of politics, be indefinitely prolonged.
In 1992, a number of amendments were adopted making changes to the executive branch. The affected sections of the Constitution were number 70, 71, 72, 73, 4, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 91, 93, 94, and 95. Changes included, required joint election of the governor and lieutenant governor. Permitted statewide constitutional officers to serve 2 consecutive terms, required duties of the lieutenant governor to be those delegated by the governor. Removed the lieutenant governor as presiding officer of the Senate, provided for determination of gubernatorial disability. Allowed the governor to retain the powers of the office when absent from the state, abolished the offices of the Register of the Land Office and Superintendent of Public Instruction. Provided for the appointment or election of members of boards and commissions as provided by law, which may include consent by the Senate.
Constitutional revision efforts. There have been calls for a new state constitution or for extensive revisions since at least the 1920s. More recently, revision efforts have had 4 major forms: the Constitution Review Commission of the 1950s, the Constitution Review Assembly of 1964 to 1966, the Special Commission on Constitutional Review of 1987, and the ongoing efforts within the framework of the interim committee structure of the Legislative Research Commission. For decades, there have been repeated efforts to amend and revise constitutional provisions regarding limitations on the ability of the governor and other constitutional state executive officers to succeed themselves, the absent from the state provision, conferring the executive power on the lieutenant governor when the governor is absent from the state, the line of gubernatorial succession, the veto power, and the number of elected state executive officials. All of these issues have been addressed in constitutional amendments adopted in 1979 and 1992, although not necessarily to the extent recommended by proponents of constitutional revision. One-term limitation. The constitutional one-term limitation was a recurring concern prior to the adoption of the 1992 amendment. According to 2012 statistics from the Council of State Governments, only one state now prohibits its governor from serving consecutive terms in office. The Constitution Review Commission, the Constitution Revision Assembly, and the Special Commission on Constitutional Review recommended removing this provision. The removal of the one-term limitation in 1992 permitted Paul Patton to succeed himself in office. Gubernatorial absence from the state. Prior to the 1992 amendment, the Constitution of 1891 required that the duties of the office of governor devolve automatically on the lieutenant governor when the governor was absent from the state. 29 states have similar provisions in their constitutions. One confers the executive power on the lieutenant governor if the governor's absence exceeds a specified length of time, one state confers executive power on the lieutenant governor only in emergency situations, and one state confers executive power only if the governor asks the lieutenant governor to serve in that capacity. Those favoring the elimination of this provision maintained that it was an anachronism in an era of instant communication. They pointed out the great potential for political confrontation when the governor and lieutenant governor are in opposite political camps, and the governor is reluctant to leave the government in the hands of the lieutenant governor. Line of gubernatorial succession and disability. The line of succession to the governorship raised the question of gubernatorial disability. In support of adoption of the 1992 amendment and preceding proposals, it was argued that the 1891 Constitution failed to deal adequately with the question of what to do when the governor became physically or mentally unable to function in the office. The Constitution stated simply that the lieutenant governor assumed the executive power when the governor was unable to discharge the duties of his office. It did not specify who was to decide whether the governor was disabled. Subsequent to the open-heart surgery of Governor Brown, a legislative subcommittee examined the issue of gubernatorial disability. Proposals were drafted but failed to pass the 1984 General Assembly. In 1987, the issue was discussed by a legislative subcommittee. Proposals relating to disability were introduced during the 1988 General Assembly and again in 1990 but failed to pass. The 1992 amendment finally addressed the issue and provides for the following line of succession: Lieutenant Governor, President of the Senate, Attorney General, and Auditor. Left unaddressed by recent constitutional revisions is a related issue. Critics maintain that the current Constitution leaves unanswered another succession question, that of who should become governor in the event a governor-elect dies before taking office. Governor Goebel, it will be recalled, died after being sworn in. One provision of the Constitution states that the governor shall remain in office until his or her successor qualifies, while another provides that the lieutenant governor takes office if the governor is unable to qualify from sections 73 and 84. The Constitution, then, is unclear, and the uncertain interval that would be required for judicial interpretation could be a chaotic one.
Thank you for viewing this history of the Kentucky Constitution. For more information, please see the following references. Citizen's Guide to the Kentucky Constitution by the Legislative Research Commission, available online. Or the book The Kentucky State Constitution by Robert M. Ireland, Oxford University Press.